September 14th, 1969. Harmony Creek, a speck of dust on the map of rural Alabama. 40 miles from the nearest real city, Deputy Sheriff Miller stands in the middle of the yard and finds he can't take a full breath. It's not the heat, though. September in the Deep South is still a suffocating blanket pushing 95 degrees. It's not the dust, though the yard is all packed earth and the wind stirs it into lazy funnels. It's the smell. The brick oven before him is radiating heat, its clay and brick walls shimmering in the morning sun. The heat is so intense it stings his face from 10 feet away, but the smoke curling from its chimney is wrong. It's heavy, cloyingly sweet, with an undercurrent that makes his stomach clench into a fist. Deputy Miller has been on the force for 2 years. He's 26, fresh from the police academy in Montgomery, where they taught him how to handle domestic disputes and track down stolen livestock. They never taught him about this. Next to the oven, on an overturned galvanized bucket, sits a woman. She's large-boned and broad-shouldered, with powerful hands stained with soot up to the elbows. She watches the young deputy with a placid, unblinking gaze. On her lap rests a round loaf of sourdough, still warm, sprinkled with sesame seeds. This is Nora Miller. She's 34. Her bread is the best in the county. People line up for it at dawn. Some drive all the way from Tuscaloosa. In 3 hours, Detective Frank Cooper from the Alabama Bureau of Investigation will sift through the ashes of this oven and find something that will make even him, a man who's investigated homicides for 12 years, turn pale. Fragments of human bone, 3 teeth with gold fillings, and the scorched buckle of a man's belt. But that's 3 hours from now. For the moment, Deputy Miller just stands there, staring at the oven, trying to reconcile one impossible fact. Why does the best bread in Harmony Creek smell like something other than wood is burning? To understand how 2 quiet sisters from a forgotten Alabama town turned their family's bread oven into a crematorium, you have to go back 2 years to November of 1967, the month the first man vanished from Harmony Creek. The heart of Alabama in the 1960s is a land of stark contrasts, a place of deep, black, fertile soil that yields cotton as if pushed from the earth by an impatient hand, and of slow, muddy rivers that crawl toward the Gulf. Summers are brutal, hitting 105 inches the shade. Winters are mild, rarely dipping below freezing. Life here is dictated by the seasons of the cotton plant. In 1967, Lyndon B. Johnson is in the White House. The war in Vietnam is escalating, but the seismic shifts of the world reach a place like Harmony Creek as faint, distorted echoes. Here, the local sheriff and the church pastor are the only authorities that truly matter. Here, Sunday service is more important than a presidential address. Every autumn, the small towns empty out as everyone, from school children to the elderly, heads to the fields for the cotton harvest. They call it white gold in the newspapers. In the towns, they call it what it is: backbreaking work. Harmony Creek is a town of 300 souls, situated on a dirt road that branches off the main highway. To get there, you have to turn off the asphalt and drive a mile down a road that's a cloud of red dust in the summer and an impassable trench of mud in the spring. It's got one main street, a Baptist church, a general store, a one-room schoolhouse, and a small clinic visited by a doctor from the city twice a week. The only telephone is at the sheriff's office. The Miller family home stands on the eastern edge of town, the last house before the cotton fields stretch out to the horizon. Beyond its weathered picket fence lies an overgrown lot, then a sluggish creek, then the endless, ruler-straight rows of cotton plants. The house itself is old, a simple clapboard structure with a tin roof and a sagging front porch veiled by a thick tangle of wisteria. The yard is large, almost half an acre. To the right of the gate is a chicken coop. To the left, a dilapidated barn that once housed a milk cow, but now stores firewood and old tools. And in the center of the yard, the brick oven. In the south, a smokehouse, or a large baking oven, is a cornerstone of rural life. But this one is different. It's a massive, dome structure of brick and clay, built by the sister's grandfather half a century ago. It's a local landmark. Neighbors often marveled. Most of these old ovens crumble after a decade, but the Millers looks like it was built yesterday. Nora would just say, "It's all in the mortar," when anyone asked. Later, the terrible truth of that statement would come to light. Nora and Daisy Miller, two sisters, both unmarried, in a small southern town in the 1960s. This is a social death sentence. A woman without a husband is a tree without roots. People whisper behind their hands, give them sideways glances at the market, and don't invite them to weddings. But somehow, the Miller sisters had found their place. They found it through bread. Nora, the elder, was 34 in 1967. A tall, formidable woman with the broad shoulders and strong, capable hands of a laborer. Her face was round and sun-weathered to the color of terracotta. Her eyes were dark, her gaze heavy and assessing, as if she were constantly weighing the world and finding it wanting. She spoke little and smiled even less. Her movements were slow, deliberate, the economy of motion of someone who has worked with their hands their entire life. Nora kneaded the dough every morning at 4. Flour, water, salt, a sourdough starter she fed like a living thing. She understood the dough on a primal level, knew by touch when it was ready. She shaped the loaves with a swift efficiency, scored them with a razor, and slid them onto the hot brick floor of the oven with a single, fluid motion. Daisy, the younger sister, was 28 and Nora's complete opposite. She was slight and thin, with the quick, darting movements of a field mouse. Her face was sharp-featured, with a delicate nose and wide, pale green eyes, a rarity in this part of the country. She talked a lot, her words tumbling out in a rush, and she laughed often, though sometimes at nothing at all. She might fall silent in the middle of a sentence, her gaze lost in the distance, only to burst into laughter a moment later for no reason anyone could see. The neighbors would tap their heads and smile sadly. "Daisy's a bit touched," they'd say, without real malice. A sweet, simple soul. Daisy's job was to tend the fire, to serve the customers, and to count the money. She was the face of the little operation. Nora was the hands. Every morning from 6 o'clock, a line would form at their gate. Housewives from town, farm hands on their way to the fields, truckers who'd made a special detour off the highway. A loaf cost $0.25. They'd buy 5, 10 at a time. Daisy would wrap the stack of bread in newspaper, tie it with twine, and hand it over with a vacant, gentle smile, dropping the coins into an old Maxwell House coffee can. On a good day, they made $5 or $6, not a fortune, but enough to live on. The sisters lived a quiet, self-contained life. Their yard was neat, the house was whitewashed, and hollyhocks grew along the fence line. The townspeople treated them with a kind of cautious respect. Two unmarried women, living alone and needing no one, were an anomaly, a puzzle. Harmony Creek was a community where every life was an open book, but the Miller sisters seemed to live behind a pane of glass nearby, but separate. Martha Ann, their next-door neighbor, a stout woman in her 60s who was the town's primary switchboard for gossip, would later testify they were good girls, quiet. That bread of theirs. Lord, it was like my own mother's, God rest her soul. But they were strange. Nora was like a stone, and Daisy was like water. Stone and water. There's a power in that, but it felt like the wrong kind of power. I felt it, but what could I say? The bread was delicious, and the girls were always polite. In a town like this, that's usually enough. But to understand the darkness that took root in these two women, you have to look into their past, to the place where it all began. Earl Miller, their father, a name that was never spoken aloud in that house. Earl was born in Harmony Creek in 1910. He fought in the Pacific in World War II and came home in 45 with a piece of shrapnel in his hip, a Purple Heart, and a sickness in his soul that nobody had a name for back then. Today, we'd call it post-traumatic stress disorder. He started drinking moonshine right away, the raw, potent corn liquor that was as much a part of the local economy as cotton. He couldn't work. His leg was a constant source of pain. He lived on a disability pension of $32 a month. He'd married a quiet, submissive girl named Martha from the next county over. A year later, Nora was born, and 6 years after that, Daisy. Martha endured. In this part of the world, if your husband hits you, you endure. If he drinks, you endure. If he screams in the night and chases you through the yard with a belt in his hand, you endure. That's just how it was. The pastor didn't get involved in a man's family business. The neighbors heard the shouting and closed their windows. The sheriff lived 20 miles away and had no time for family squabbles. What Earl did to his daughters would only come out years later in the cold, sterile environment of a courtroom. Nora would tell Detective Cooper in a flat, emotionless voice that their father had abused them since they were small children and that their mother knew but was too terrified to stop it. In 1949, when Nora was 16 and Daisy was 10, Martha Miller hanged herself in the barn. Nora found her that morning when she went to feed the chickens. Her mother hung silently, her bare feet dangling a few inches from the packed dirt floor. Her face was a mask of utter exhaustion. They buried her quickly. The pastor said a few words. The neighbors brought casseroles. Earl sat on the porch, drinking and crying. A week later, he brought home another woman, a loud, brassy widow from the city, with 2 children of her own, and threw his daughters out. "Get out of my sight," he slurred. "I don't want you." Nora was 16, Daisy 10, no family, no money, no roof over their heads. The pastor let them sleep in the church basement for a week. Then Martha Ann, the neighbor, took them in, giving them a corner of her dusty attic and a plate of food at her table. Nora started working in the cotton fields, picking from sunup to sundown, her hands raw and bleeding. Daisy went to school but often skipped, preferring to sit by the creek, talking to herself. 6 months later, Earl Miller vanished. One morning, his new woman showed up at the sheriff's office, claiming Earl had walked out the night before and never came back. They searched for a few days. As a formality, they checked the creek. The local juke joints asked around. Nothing. The official story was that he'd gotten drunk and wandered off, maybe fell in a ditch somewhere and froze. It had been a cold winter. No one filed a missing person report. An alcoholic, disabled vet with no job? Who was going to miss him? His woman packed her things and went back to the city. The house was left empty. And then, Nora did something that would define the rest of her life. At 17 years old, she walked into the sheriff's office and asked for her house back. The old sheriff, a man named Yancey, looked at her, scratched his head, and said, "I reckon it's yours. Ain't nobody else wants it." The sisters moved back into their father's house. The first thing Nora did was drag every last trace of him, his clothes, his boots, his old army cap into the yard and burn it in the brick oven. She whitewashed the walls, patched the roof, and planted the hollyhocks along the fence. And then she started baking bread. No one knew how she learned. Her mother had never taught her, but her hands seemed to remember a skill they'd never been taught. The first loaves were misshapen and burnt. Daisy ate them and said they were wonderful. Within a month, the loaves were perfect. Within 6 months, there was a line at her gate. And so, the Miller sisters found their place in Harmony Creek, not through a husband or children, but through the fire and bread of their grandfather's oven. For 17 years, from 1950 to 1967, they lived a quiet, peaceful life. Daisy grew up, but her strangeness remained. The sudden laughter, the conversations with thin air. Nora grew even more silent, more formidable. Suitors had come, twice. A young farmer for Daisy, an older widower with 3 children for Nora. Both were turned away. Nora's response was always the same. "We don't need a man in this house." A rumor started to spread through the town that the sisters were cursed, that a darkness hung over that house, and that no man who entered it would ever come out alive. As it turned out, That last part was the gospel truth. But in 1967, no one knew that yet. In 1967, the Miller sisters were just two quiet women who baked the best bread in the county. And then, men started to disappear. Rusty Hakim, 40 years old, a tractor driver for the local co-op, divorced, a drunk. He lived alone in a crumbling shack on the opposite side of town from the Millers. In his youth, Rusty had been a handsome man, but years of moonshine had bloated his face and broken the blood vessels in his nose. His wife had taken their son and moved to Florida years ago. They kept him on at the co-op because good tractor men were hard to find, and Rusty could plow a perfectly straight furrow even after downing a pint of corn liquor. In November of '67, after the cotton harvest was finished, Rusty went on a bender. After a week, his money and his liquor ran out. He started making the rounds through town, trying to borrow a few dollars. No one knows for sure how he ended up at the Miller sisters' gate. According to Nora's later testimony, Rusty stumbled into their yard near dusk, already drunk, and begged for some bread on credit. Nora gave him a loaf. He sat on the porch steps, eating and mumbling about his ex-wife and his wasted life. Then he started to cry, and then he reached for Daisy. Daisy was sweeping ash from the mouth of the oven. Rusty grabbed her by the wrist and tried to pull her onto his lap, slurring something crude. Daisy screamed. It wasn't a scream of pain, but of pure, distilled terror, the same scream Nora had heard 1,000 times in their childhood, when their father's heavy footsteps came down the hall. Nora told the detective, "I didn't think. My hands just did it." Lying by the woodpile was a heavy stone pestle used for grinding spices. Nora picked it up and brought it down on the back of Rusty's head. Just once. He collapsed face first into the dust and didn't move again. Daisy just stood there staring. She wasn't crying. Her eyes held an expression Nora would later describe with a single word: recognition. They both recognized this moment. A man reaching for them, a woman unable to escape. But this time, something was different. This time, the woman had struck first. What happened over the next 3 hours was something Nora recounted to the police with chilling calmness. They waited until full dark had settled over the town. When the last light in the last house had gone out, Nora brought the axe from the barn. Daisy stoked the fire in the oven, feeding it with seasoned oak until the bricks glowed a fierce, hungry red. They laid a canvas tarpaulin on the ground. Nora worked with the axe. Daisy helped. What remained, they fed into the oven. Piece by piece, Nora tended the fire all night, 6 hours without a break. By sunrise, all that was left of Rusty Hakim was a pile of fine, gray ash, flecked with tiny white fragments of bone. Nora swept it out. Some of it she scattered in the vegetable garden. The rest, she mixed with water and clay and used it to patch the inside of the oven, adding a new, thin layer over the old. The oven walls grew a little thicker, a little stronger. At 6 a.m., Nora lit a normal fire, kneaded her dough, and began to bake. By 7, the usual line had formed at her gate. Martha Ann, the neighbor, bought 3 loaves and took a bite right there. "Nora, honey, this bread tastes special today. What'd you put in it?" Nora didn't answer, just shrugged. Behind her, Daisy was laughing, her quiet, disjointed laugh. Rusty's clothes, his denim overalls and worn work boots, Nora didn't burn. She folded them neatly, tied them with twine, and carried them down to the root cellar beneath the house. When asked why, she said, "I don't know. It just felt like I needed to keep them, as proof that it really happened, that I didn't dream it." They missed Rusty after about a week. The co-op foreman sent a boy to check on him. The tractor was parked outside the shack, but Rusty was gone. The door was unlocked. Inside, an empty bottle and a half-eaten piece of bread on the table. Everyone figured he'd gone off to see his brother in Mississippi. He'd done it before, but this time, he didn't come back. Nobody looked too hard. The town's deputy had just retired, and they hadn't hired a new one yet. The foreman just marked Rusty down as having quit. A family of sharecroppers moved into his shack. That night, For the first time in her life, Nora took a simple, spiral-bound notebook and a pencil and made her first entry. Asterisk, date. The 12th of November, 1967. Name, Rusty. Burned for 6 hours. Bones turned to dust. Asterisk. When Detective Cooper read that notebook 2 years later, he would say to his young partner, "I've seen killers who kept trophies. I've seen a man who walled his wife up in the basement, but to just write it down in a notebook, calm as can be, like you're balancing a checkbook, that's a new one on me." But that was still a long way off. 2 more years and 3 more lives. Because after Rusty Hakim, something inside Nora Miller didn't break. It clicked into place. The pestle to the back of the head, the oven burning for 6 hours, the bread in the morning. It was simple. It was logical. It was right. She wasn't looking for her next victim. Her next victim came to her. February 1968. 3 months after Rusty's disappearance, Brad Odom, 38, a trucker for a regional shipping company, drove a Ford F-100. He was a cheerful, stocky man with a gold front tooth that glinted when he smiled. He was married with 2 kids, a normal man living a normal life. On February 11th, Brad was hauling a load of cottonseed from Harmony Creek. On his way back, empty. His truck died just outside of town. It was already dark. He walked the 2 miles into Harmony Creek, looking for a place to spend the night. According to Nora, Brad knocked on their gate around 9 p.m. He asked if he could sleep in their barn, explaining that his truck had broken down. Nora, seeing no harm in him, offered him the small guest room instead. She gave him tea and a loaf of bread. Brad was grateful and polite. He ate, thanked them, and went to bed. During her interrogation, Nora said, "He was a good man. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't fresh. Just a trucker with bad luck." Detective Cooper asked her, "Then why?" Nora was silent for a long time. Then she said, "He snored. Loud. Like my father used to. I woke up in the middle of the night, and for a second, I didn't know where I was. I thought I was 11 years old again, and my father was asleep in the next room, and I knew that any minute he was going to get up and come for me." She got out of bed, took the axe from the woodshed, and walked into the guest room where Brad Odom was sleeping. He never woke up. This time, Daisy helped without a word, without a tear. The body to the yard, the oven to full blast. 6 hours of fire. In the morning, ash and bread, and a line of customers at the gate. They found Brad's truck the next day on the side of the road. The company assumed he'd abandoned the truck and run off. It happens sometimes. Brad's wife reported him missing, but the search was half-hearted. A year later, she filed for divorce in absentia. Another entry in the notebook. Asterisk, the 11th of February, 1968. Brad, the trucker, burned 6 hours. The smoke was greasy and black, long time burning. Ash for the garden and the oven. Asterisk. 5 words from that entry would haunt Detective Cooper for the rest of his career. Asterisk. The smoke was greasy and black. Asterisk. No one in Harmony Creek suspected a thing. A traveling trucker vanishes, who's to care? People disappeared. This was the South. The roads were long and life was cheap, and the Miller's sister's bread was still the best around. Months passed. Arthur Finch, 52, the accountant at the general store, a widower, a quiet, meticulous man who wore a tie to work every day. He was educated, respected, and lonely. He started stopping by the Miller house, first for bread, then just to sit on the porch and talk to Nora. The town noticed. The old men at the store nodded their approval. It was time Arthur found himself a good woman. In March, Arthur came calling in the evening with a box of chocolates. He sat on the porch swing, drank iced tea, and then he proposed. "Miss Nora," he said, "you're a fine woman. I'm alone. You're alone. Perhaps we could make a life together." Nora said no. Arthur wasn't offended. He finished his tea, stood up, and started to leave. But at the gate, He turned and said, with genuine kindness, "It's a shame. This house could use a man's hand. It's hard for a woman on her own. Asterisk. A man's hand. Asterisk. 2 words. The man's hand that had struck her. The man's hand that had violated her. The man's hand that had thrown her out of her own home." Nora later told the detective. "He was a good person, a kind person. But when he said that, I didn't see him anymore. I saw my father. It was like all men were just one man, and that one man is always reaching, always grabbing, always telling you that you can't make it without him." Arthur Finch never made it out of the gate. The pestle, the yard, the night, the oven. This time, Daisy cried, biting the corner of her apron to stifle the sound. Nora worked in silence. In the morning, ash and bread. The ledger. Asterisk the 16th of March, 1968. Arthur, the accountant. Burned 5 hours. Bones were small. Daisy cried, but then she stopped. Asterisk. They looked for Arthur for a while. He was a man of routine. But eventually, the sheriff just shrugged. The file was closed. Then came Sam Brewer, 36, the foreman at the Cotton Gin. Strong, handsome, and he didn't drink a rare combination. He lived with his elderly mother, Hattie, a tiny, tough-as-nails woman. Sam was the town's most eligible bachelor, and he had eyes for Daisy Miller. He started buying bread every day, though his mother baked her own. He'd linger at the gate in the evenings, waiting for Daisy to come out. And Daisy, in his presence, seemed to transform. She laughed. A real, melodic laugh. The vacant look in her eyes softened. Even Martha Ann, the neighbor, was happy for her. Finally, she thought, maybe that girl can have a normal life. Sam came to ask for Daisy's hand in June. Nora said no. He came back a month later. Nora said no again. "What about what Daisy wants?" he asked. Daisy was silent. Nora stood up, her dark eyes locking with his. "You leave now, Mr. Brewer, and don't you come back." Sam was hurt and angry. "That woman's a devil," he told his mother. "Daisy wants to, I can see it in her eyes. But that stone-hearted sister of hers won't let her." Hattie, a wise woman, warned him, "Son, you leave it be. There's something wrong in that house. I can feel it." Sam didn't listen. In August, during a blistering heat wave, he went to the Miller house a 3rd time. He went in the evening, when he knew Nora would be at the market in the next town. Daisy let him in. They sat in the yard, drinking lemonade. What they talked about, no one knows. Daisy would never say. When Nora returned, she saw them. Sam was sitting close to Daisy, holding her hand, and Daisy wasn't pulling away. She was smiling. Nora set down her shopping bags, walked to the woodshed, and came back with the axe. Sam saw her and stood up, holding his hands out. "Now, Miss Nora, hold on. The first blow caught him in the chest. He staggered back. The second one finished the job. Daisy just sat there, watching, as if in a trance. Nora told the police. She would have gone with him. I saw it. He would have taken her away, and he would have been good to her at first. They're all good at first. Then come the hands, then the nights, then the screaming and a rope in the barn. I couldn't let that happen. Not again." It was the longest explanation she ever gave. That night, the oven burned for 7 hours. The ledger, asterisk, the 14th of August, 1968. Sam, the foreman, strong, burned 7 hours. The belt buckle didn't burn. I threw it in. The ash, asterisk. But this time, one person didn't just let it go. Hattie Brewer, Sam's mother. She knew her son. He would never leave without a word. She started asking questions. The last person to see Sam alive was a 12-year-old boy who saw him walking toward the Miller sisters' house. Hattie went there herself. Daisy answered the door, pale and trembling. Hattie looked her dead in the eye and saw the one thing a mother searching for her son can always recognize: fear. Hattie went to the county seat and filed a missing person report. The report sat in a dusty file for 3 months. And then a new deputy sheriff arrived in Harmony Creek. His name was Miller. Deputy Miller was young and idealistic. He'd grown up in the city, which was important. He wasn't part of the town's web of secrets and silences. He was assigned to Harmony Creek in January of 1969. The first person to visit him was Hattie Brewer. She told him the whole story. Miller listened, took notes, and promised he'd look into it. He started by making a list of everyone who'd vanished from the town in the last 2 years. Rusty Hakeem, Brad Odom, Arthur Finch, Sam Brewer, 4 men from a town of 300. Miller knew that wasn't a coincidence. It was a pattern. He drew a map of the town and plotted each man's last known movements. All 4 paths led to the same place: the house on the eastern edge of town, the Miller sisters' house. He started watching them. He noticed the smoke from their oven at odd hours late at night, and he noticed the smell, that sweet, heavy, sickening smell. In June of '69, he drove to the state capitol and laid his files on the desk of a senior detective at the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. The detective looked at the young deputy's notes, at the map with the converging lines. He could have dismissed him, but he saw the conviction in Miller's eyes. He picked up the phone. "Frank," he said, "get in here. I think I've got something for you." Detective Frank Cooper was 39, a chain-smoking veteran who'd seen the worst of humanity. He came to Harmony Creek undercover, posing as an auditor from the state, checking the co-op's books. For a week, he just listened. He drank coffee at the general store. He sat on porches with the old men, and he heard the stories, the whispers about the Miller sisters, the strange smells, the nighttime fires. He talked to Martha Ann, the neighbor. "Detective," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I'm an old woman. I know the smell of a wood fire, and I know the smell of meat on a grill. And I'm telling you, what comes from that oven sometimes, it ain't either of those things." Cooper knew. He and Miller began a quiet stakeout. For 2 months, nothing. Then, on the night of August 14th, exactly 1 year after Sam Brewer disappeared, they saw it, a pillar of thick, dark smoke rising from the Miller house in the dead of night. Deputy Miller crept up to the fence and peered through a crack. The yard was lit by the hellish red glow of the oven. Nora stood before it, methodically feeding fuel into the fire. Her face illuminated from below, calm and focused. Daisy sat on the porch, rocking back and forth, humming a tuneless little song to herself. There was no one else in the yard, but the oven was burning with an infernal intensity, a heat far greater than was needed for baking bread. Cooper got his search warrant. Which brings us back to that morning, September 14th, 1969. While Deputy Miller stood paralyzed by the smell, Detective Cooper walked over to the oven. "Ma'am," he said to Nora, his voice calm, "we're going to have to ask you to step away." He turned to his forensics expert. "When this thing cools down, I want every last speck of ash." It took 4 hours for the oven to cool. The forensics man, a quiet, meticulous fellow named Savchenko, began to sift. 20 minutes in, he held up a small, white fragment with a pair of tweezers. "Frank," he said quietly, "this is human bone." Over the next 4 hours, they found 17 bone fragments, 3 teeth, one with a gold filling, and Sam Brewer's scorched belt buckle. While the oven gave up its secrets, Cooper searched the house. In the root cellar, beneath the floorboards, he found them. 4 neat bundles tied with twine. He opened the first, a man's denim overalls and work boots. The second, a trucker's greasy shirt and canvas pants. In the pocket, a trip ticket with the name times Odom, B***. The third, a worn suit, a white shirt, and a tie. In the pocket, a pair of glasses with thick lenses. One arm repaired with black electrical tape, The fourth, a clean cotton shirt and jeans, and a leather belt with a missing buckle. 4 lives, reduced to the clothes they wore on their last night on Earth. Cooper came up from the cellar and looked at Nora. She was still sitting on the bucket, watching them, her expression unreadable. "Whose clothes are these?" Cooper asked. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "You already know, Detective," she said. "Why are you asking?" "I have to," he said. Nora nodded. "They belong to the men I killed, 4 of them. Rusty, Brad, Arthur, and Sam." She said the names as if reading a grocery list. Across the yard, Daisy crumpled against the side of the house, her face a mask of vacant terror. Cooper turned to his deputy. "Miller, arrest them both." As they led her away in handcuffs, Nora looked back at the brick oven. A long, final, almost tender look. Then she turned to her sister and whispered something in her ear. Daisy nodded, and finally broke, her sobs echoing across the silent, watching town. Later, in an old chest in the bedroom, Cooper found the notebook. 4 entries. 4 lives. A ledger of death. He closed it, went outside, and lit a cigarette. For the first time all day, his hands were shaking. The trial was held behind closed doors. Nora confessed to everything. Calmly, factually. She insisted Daisy was innocent, that her sister knew nothing, that she'd told her they were just burning animal bones. It was the only lie she told. Forensic evidence proved Daisy had been a willing, if silent, participant. But the most shocking revelation came when the judge asked Nora about her motive. She spoke, for the first time, of her father. "He was the first," she said. "He came back after he threw us out, drunk. He went for Daisy. I hid him. I burned him. In that oven. Nobody ever came looking for him. Nobody cared. I thought it was over. But then Rusty came, and I knew it would never be over. They would always come, trying to get into our house, trying to put their hands on us. I was just keeping our home safe." Nora Miller was found guilty and sentenced to death by electric chair. The sentence was carried out in the autumn of 1970. She was 37 years old. Daisy was deemed mentally unfit to stand a full trial and was committed to a state psychiatric hospital for the rest of her life. The town of Harmony Creek tried to forget. The brick oven was demolished with sledgehammers. The workers said the mortar was unnaturally hard, almost like stone, fused together by incredible heat. They built a new town hall on the property where the Miller house once stood. But the story lingered, a dark stain on the town's soul. For 20 years, no one in Harmony Creek bought bread from a stranger. Every family baked their own. This isn't just a story about evil. It's a story about where evil comes from. It grows in the dark, nurtured by silence. It grew in the silence of neighbors who heard the screams from the Miller house and just closed their windows. It grew in the silence of a town that saw 2 little girls cast out and did nothing. Nora Miller was a monster, but she was a monster that Harmony Creek had helped create. She paid the price for her crimes, but the evil didn't begin with her. And you have to wonder, did it end with her? Sometimes, evil isn't a man in a dark coat with a knife. Sometimes, it's a quiet woman with flour on her hands who offers you a warm loaf of bread with a gentle smile. And you take it, and you eat, and you tell her how good it is, because you don't know what's gone into it. Or maybe because you don't want to.